Hello, welcome back to Chapter 5, Teaching Approaches and Instructional Issues. We are still in Section 1, where we are discussing 9 teaching methods or approaches in second language teaching and learning. Last time we discussed in Part 1 the old methods of teaching a language, with the exception of the Berlitz method, which started a long time ago but is still used in certain contexts nowadays. In Part 2, we will be examining more recent methods that are used in most classrooms all over the world. Suggestpedia, total physical response, communicative language teaching, task-based language teaching, and finally a special approach, which is the Postmethod Perspective. Suggestpedia is an effective humanistic approach that is related to the emotions and feelings of the learner. If we remember, Kirsten discussed the affective filter that affects and might be an obstacle for language learners. And based on that hypothesis of having affective factors which might be obstacles in the process of acquiring a second language, proponents of the Suggestpedia approach believed that the power of suggestion affects human behavior and as a result affects the process of acquiring a language. You can check this link for an example of a lesson in which Suggestpedia is used. Georgy Lozanov, the main proponent of this method, believed that the language learner needed to be liberated, that is, freed from stress and anxiety which affect the learning process. Language learning must be in an environment that is non-threatening, very relaxing, physically comfortable, and preferably using music to relax the students. If you look at these students here, they are actually singing. You might have them listen to music, etc., to de-stress and make the atmosphere of the classroom more comfortable. Therefore, this relaxed ambience actually helps learners to be more receptive to the language through dialogues, role-playing, and other devices which require interaction. According to Lozanov, students who attended, based on a study he did, students who attended Suggestopedic sessions, approximately 100 hours, were able to remember 90% of the 100 to 1,000 lexical items they were exposed to during these sessions. Therefore, their attention was greater than usual. This method has been kept from being adopted on a wide scale because of its lack of evidence on its efficacy, how successful it is. However, it is still a method that can be employed along with other methods and not all the time. It could be a supplement for other methods. Now we come to the total physical response, which is a new method directed especially towards early beginners and early learners of a second language. It was developed in the 1960s by James Asher, a psychologist or a psychology professor in California. According to Asher, this method makes young children listen and then respond and then speak. And this was based on how children acquire a language in a natural way, especially the first language. They actually listen, and then when they're comfortable enough, they start producing that language, that is, speaking the language. Therefore, according to Asher, this is how language teachers should engage learners in physical activity by responding to what they listen to, and then later they speak. Therefore, there was no pressure to produce the language, and therefore, what students have to do in TPR is to carry out the actions which the teacher does, as we see in this picture, The teacher demonstrates certain actions or gestures, and the students have to respond to what they listen by imitating her. Therefore, the language is linked to movements. Learners are encouraged to speak only when they are ready to do so. So again, this is related to affective filter to relieve stress which they might have. This method is generally targeted towards, as I said before, beginning learners who need to acquire elementary speaking skills. Alright, so please check your textbook for an example of what TPR includes. So you will notice that TPR is applied in language classrooms across the world, especially in kindergarten and elementary classrooms. Alright, while it's not always used as a whole approach to language teaching, it is used as a supplement most of the time. It is employed a lot, maybe once per day, maybe once per week. And in certain cases, it predominates most of the instructional phase of teaching a second language. According to Asher, he expected in 2001 that in 25 years, that is in 2026, the research on TPR will cause thousands of classrooms in that research. The TPR will be applied as a major focus in instruction or as an effective supplement. So it's still a fresh method and a lot of experimenting and researching is being done on it. 7. Communicative language teaching. Here we have another prevalent and famous method in teaching a language. In the 1970s and 80s, teachers in North America noticed that language instruction failed to enhance students' ability to communicate competently, and that is effectively in real-life situations. Therefore, they suggested the communicative language teaching approach. Please here keep in mind the hypotheses that we studied in Chapter 4 related to processing, something like the interaction hypothesis, the comprehensible output hypothesis, which emphasize the role of communication and conversation. So applied linguists and teachers recognized the need to teach languages in ways that allowed communication, and that is natural conversation, and not only that, but to produce meaning. So please focus on the word meaning when it comes to communicative language teaching. Instead of memorizing like the old methods we studied in part 1, they emphasized real life situations and meaning to communication. An applied linguist, Douglas Brown, offered a useful synthesis of features of communicative language. So if I want to employ communicative language teaching in my classroom, what should I do? So classroom goals should be focused on communicative competence and not grammatical or linguistic competence. That is developing listening and speaking skills. Therefore, language techniques had to be pragmatic, that is practical, authentic, using authentic materials, okay, related to everyday life and maybe real items, we will see later, real articles, magazine papers, websites, posts, etc. And using the language for a functional and meaningful purpose, using the language to solve problems or to make meaning based on a certain situation. Therefore, organizational language forms, that is grammar, were not the central focus. However, eventually through communication, students would be able to accomplish those purposes. Fluency and accuracy were seen as complementary principles, not the basic ones, although sometimes fluency and accuracy were focused on. Alright, and in the communicative classroom, students ultimately have to use the language productively and receptively, that is, input and output, to produce language and to receive it and understand it, most importantly in an unrehearsed way. That is, the teacher would give the students a certain situation or problem that they need to communicate, interact together in order to solve in an unrehearsed way. That is, the teacher does not give them an assignment to prepare their communicative conversation, but rather it would be spontaneous and automatic. Therefore, the communicative language classroom recognized the importance of using authentic materials, as I said before, using real items, real context in order to teach the target language, because we want the learner to acquire the language in a natural way and use it in meaningful ways. Check the textbook for more information. Now, when it comes to task-based language teaching, you must know that it is kind of related to CLT. However, it's a further development of communicative language teaching. Norris in 2011 defined TBLT as an approach to second or foreign language education that integrates theoretical and empirical foundations, that is, theory and application, for good pedagogy with a focus on tangible, that is, concrete, real learning outcomes called tasks. That is the product of what the learners are able to do. Okay? Therefore, according to TBLT, CLT had certain limitations related to promoting fluency rather than previous teaching approaches. It may be less successful in promoting grammatical accuracy, so there was more focus on fluency and less on accuracy. Another thing is that the TBLT used also research that emphasized the important roles of input, interaction, and output. Focus here on the output, the task which Norris talked about. Therefore, the TBLT is closely related to the concept of negotiation for meaning from the interaction hypothesis and noticing from the noticing hypothesis in L2 learning. Therefore, L2 acquisition does generally call upon predictable cognitive processes, and that these may be maximized through a context that features rich input, purposeful interaction, and pushed output out of the learners. That is a very holistic approach to communication. Therefore, the notion task is central to this approach. And what is a task? It is an activity in which meaning is primary. There is some communication problem to solve. Not only that, there's some sort of relationship to real-world activities. This is still similar to CLT. And then the task completion has some priority. There must be a result, a product, okay, that the learners present. And there should be an assessment of the task. Okay, therefore, as I mentioned before, TBLT aims at maximizing the learner's engagement, meaningful exchanges, and finally pushing it more than just linguistic accuracy and learning about the grammar or structure of the language, but involves social action and pragmatic goals using that language and mobilizing their linguistic skills in finding solutions to real-world problems. Therefore, the instructor here acts as a guide and does not give solutions or answers or the tasks immediately, but is a result of the student's work. TBLT is becoming the most used method in teaching SL nowadays. Now we come to the last perspective, which is the post-method perspective suggested by Dr. Kumara Vadivellu, who is a recent professor of linguistics, who suggests that there's no single method that is the best for teachers out there, and therefore we should break the cycle, and teachers should be choosing their methods and practices based on the context in which they are teaching the second language. Therefore, teachers need to be reflective in their classroom instruction, and they need to have a degree of creativity, artistry, and sensitivity towards the context of teaching. Therefore, he suggests the 3 factors or parameters: particularity, which means the particular context in which language is being taught; practicality, that is the relationship between theory and practice. Can this approach be applied? And finally, possibility. can teachers with the support of governments and corporations apply this method